How do you ace an HR operations interview and ensure you get the job? Hey there, my name's Josh. I'm the founder of HR University. And before we go into interview questions and answers around HR operations, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. And that way you don't miss any of our future HR lessons. Now let's start. So before we dive into questions, we need foundation. That means understanding the goals of HR operations. And that way you'll know what to focus on during an HR operations interview. So first, HR operations focuses on maintaining employee relations to ensure a healthy and safe work environment. They are also responsible for ensuring that all HR operations comply with the organization's rules and regulations. In addition, HR operations work to develop efficient strategies and practices to boost productivity and ongoing processes. Furthermore, when fulfilling their job duties, HR professionals keep in view the sustainability goals regarding all HR operations and procedures to maintain the balance in HR with the given resources, because resources are almost always limited. And there are several types of questions an interviewer asks during an HR operations interview. And some of the most common question categories are HR administration questions, leadership questions, problem-solving questions, interpersonal skills questions, strategic questions, compliance and regulation questions, and recruitment questions. Now let's go ahead and go over each category. So first we have administrative questions. An HR operations professional must oversee the administrative tasks within an HR department, and therefore they must understand the procedures and guide or follow other HR personnel like HR managers. The typical administrative questions a candidate faces in an HR operations interview include the following. So how do you ensure proper management of employee records? How do you prioritize diverse tasks and strategic and day-to-day administrative activities during a busy week? And first, let's cover how do you ensure proper management of employee records question. You want to outline a clear strategy for your potential employer. Go through steps one by one, briefly explaining your approach. Familiarizing yourself with company policies is the first step. And a concise yet practical plan is critical for achieving HR compliance and preparing papers for audit, litigation, internal reviews, and external requests. And you want to be aware that there are many different documents in this category. They include applications, resumes, verification documents, payroll and benefit selections, retirement and termination documents, and much more. You want to prepare to elaborate on each section and talk about your data management skills as well. And next is, how do you prioritize tasks when in a busy week? Well, you will need to showcase your time management skills and ability to discern which tasks are most important. And sometimes your boss or manager will clearly state this. At other times, we'll have to call the shots. And knowing how to figure out the most crucial tasks and deal with it first can make or break your career. And you also need to learn to delegate tasks. And give an example of when you were left to your own devices, yet managed to prioritize tasks successfully and solve problems. The second category is leadership questions. Professionals like HR operations managers and specialists require leadership abilities. Therefore, the HR interviewer asks them about prior experience exhibiting leadership and taking initiative. Interviewers can include hypothetical scenarios where they ask how you'd react. For example, the common questions candidates face are, how do you determine that particular coaching or mentoring style suits an employee? And how do you bring together professionals who don't wish to collaborate? And tell us about your experience with fiscal management, such as budgeting, cutting costs, and building and maintaining reserves. The first question is, how do you determine that particular coaching or mentoring style suits an employee? And when answering, prioritize your leadership skills. Still, this doesn't mean that you must assume an extremely active role. Quite the contrary. A more passive, receptive approach is better. And say that you love observing people, how they react in specific circumstances, and how they perform under stress. And through such observation, you gather information and create tailor-made coaching methods instead of taking a one-size-fits-all approach. And the next question is that we have here, how do you bring together professionals who don't wish to collaborate? And conflicting personalities are one of the biggest challenges in the corporate world. So you need to show your ability to create a supportive work environment. State your intention to communicate expectations clearly and proactively. Mention that you like to use online platforms to stay in touch with remote, less receptive employees. And this is for them often less challenging than constant face-to-face pressure. And keeping an eye on them will allow you to focus on each person's strengths and find friendly overlap zones with others. A slow and steady approach builds trust. And the final question in the category is, tell us about your experience with fiscal management, such as budgeting, cutting costs, and building and maintaining reserves. HR and leadership are not just about people skills, Focusing on fiscal management is just as important, and choose between presenting a more comprehensive, all-encompassing strategy or showcasing a smaller past project. And some options are reconsidering healthcare providers, implementing methods to reduce risk, revisiting salary levels, eliminating unnecessary programs, and outsourcing certain services. And the third category we have is problem-solving related questions. Organizations expect you to possess powerful problem-solving and analytical thinking abilities. Therefore, interviewers ask candidates about their past experiences resolving different issues. Some common problem-solving questions you may face during the interview for an HR operation role are, during your previous roles, what was a time when you crafted and presented a better way of performing a process? How do you decide when choosing between two solutions to a specific challenge? So the first one here is, what was a time when you crafted and presented a better way of performing a task? And this question is not only about problem solving, but also innovation. In today's world, these two go hand in hand. When quizzed about your experience, describe your personal experience establishing a more efficient, new method of performing tasks. Start with a clear outline, continue with your process for creating a plan, explain the implementation, and highlight how your new method improved operations. So really dial in on those results at the end there. Now let's move to the next question. How do you decide when choosing between two solutions to a specific challenge? The interviewer will ask you about your decision-making skills to ensure you can act in the moment and pick the right solution at the drop of a hat. Explain how you weigh the pros and cons, what elimination methods you use, and how you adapt your approach to each unique situation. This is where your approach can really shine. Do you favor cutting costs? How do you deal with employee satisfaction, productivity? Pick the one you tend to focus on the most and explain why. And next we have interpersonal skills related questions. The HR operations professional interacts with diverse categories of employees throughout the organization. They have to work with other colleagues within the HR department. Hence, they need proper communication and collaborative skills to ensure productivity. And some common questions are, how do you collaborate with a colleague with poor communication skills? And if an error you made comes forth, describe your reaction steps you would take to rectify your mistake. So the first question that we mentioned is, how do you collaborate with a colleague with poor communication skills? And you can answer this by outlining a communication strategy that you know works well, and list methods like creating a safe space or being upfront and open to feedback. And mention that you brainstormed ways to foster accountability, and don't forget to pinpoint a few practical ways of praising positive development in employee behavior. And something as simple as a reward system can nudge people in the right direction. And when answering the question, talk about your empathy and provide examples and, of course, results. And the next question, if an error you made comes forth, describe your reaction and steps you would take to rectify your mistake. You must show your willingness to acknowledge mistakes and own up to them. The readiness to apologize is always good and makes you more approachable and accountable to your team members. Explain how you usually evaluate your performance and how you solve problems generated by your own mistakes. Also, touch on how you set new goals, stick to them, and review your performance. And next, we have strategic questions. HR operations professional needs a strategic mindset. Therefore, the interviewer asks candidates questions that test their ability to analyze scenarios, understand the limit of resources, and create robust strategies for HR processes. Regardless, strategic questions don't always have a straightforward answer and show the candidate's thinking process. Some commonly asked strategic questions are, how do you strategize processes that make performance reviews easier and quicker for different departments? How do you begin planning the strategic implementation of a newly introduced company policy across the whole organization? And it is helpful to practice strategic thinking and planning by reading hypothetical scenarios and studying solutions. Now let's move to the first question. How do you strategize processes that make performance reviews easier for different departments? And this part of the interview prompts you to choose between tried and tested methods and your ideas. If you rely on proven strategies that make performance reviews much shorter, hint at the increase in frequency of reviews, conducting base reviews on a single topic, and the ways to make it about goals and objectives. And if you prefer an approach that is more your own, well then make sure you strengthen your argument with examples. And of course, always focus on the results of those examples. And if you could dial in on specifically the data and parallel with those results, you'll do even better. And next is, how do you plan strategic implementation of newly introduced company policy? Since this is a massive undertaking, start by discussing how you start with setting clear goals and defining key variables, followed by talking about determining roles and responsibilities. And then next comes delegating work. With a tight-knit team, you can execute the plan and monitor progress. Just don't forget to provide continued support and, if needed, take corrective action. Getting closure on the project should be followed by a comprehensive review for future reference. And the next category is compliance and regulation questions. The Human Resources Department ensures that the organization complies with all relevant legislation and regulatory laws. Therefore, the interviewer assesses how the candidate addresses issues related to compliance and regulation. And questions from this category are technical and involve significant legislation jargon. And some common questions here are, how do you handle compliance conflicts in the past? When an employee disobeys an organization's policy, what is the ideal process to follow? The first question is, how did you handle compliance conflicts in the past? When it comes to addressing conflicts of interest, there are a few steps you should talk about. You must integrate COI, which is informing your broader staff about the risk management strategy, and remember that training is vital for them to understand. Explain how you define the right policies in the past. Suggest the best way to manage and document conflicts of interest as well. And signal that you are always willing to listen to the tone at the top and build a robust compliance culture within your team. And next we have, when an employee disobeys an organization's policy, what is the ideal process to follow? Don't fall into the trap of discussing penalties at first. They should be the very last options here. Start by ensuring that the employee understands the order. More often than not, lack of clarity will be source of the error in execution, and show that you are ready to consider workplace factors and the influence of other team members. And if you can correct the mistakes together, there will be no need for a progressive step discipline program. Also, bring up rewards for future compliance. And last year, we have recruitment related questions. An HR operations officer has to handle recruiting and onboarding processes. Therefore, interviewers assess if the candidate knows the best practices within that HR function. And some common interview questions include, how do you measure success of the onboarding experience within the first 90 days? And how do you ensure you screen irrelevant or poorly qualifying applicants and forward only the best possible fits? The first question is, how do you measure success of the onboarding experience within the first 90 days? And there are more than a couple of methods you can use and that you should bring up. One is looking at onboarding course completion rates. Another is calculating time to productivity rates and tracking engagement rates. And you could use that using your HRIS system and also using performance analysis surveys. Quizzing new hires on their learning and openly asking for feedback are equally effective. And you should also seek out 360-degree feedback, not only from employees, but also from peers and managers. And finally, we have, how do you screen poorly qualifying applicants and forward only the best possible fits? Screening makes sense when searching for a niche, highly technical position. For prospective candidates to meet baseline requirements, you can always implement technology to help you out. And when answering this question, make sure you are familiar with the software commonly used for that purpose. And mention that you may not always be in favor of such screening because it can lead to a lack of diversity and inclusion. And if you want, you can talk about how machines make mistakes, but don't spend too much time on that topic. And emphasize that you see the advantages of it, yet still prefer to do it slowly so you get the right candidates. This will highlight your determination to work hard in search of the best results. And there we have it. That's all about HR operation interview questions. And if you feel like you have a better understanding of how to answer these questions so you can go ahead and ace your HR interview, make sure to go ahead and like this video, subscribe to our channel, and that way you can keep up to date with all of our lessons on how to become a great HR professional. And again, my name is Josh. I am the founder of HR University here, and I'll go ahead and see you on some of our following lessons. Cheers.